Hello, everyone. Welcome to Real Talk Food Safety with Tia and Jill.
And as you can see, today we are actually in a little corner of the conference,
Yes.
just trying to get away so that we could be live with you today. So
Yes,
we're happy that you're here with us too.
absolutely. And if you've been following us on LinkedIn, which we all know that you do, we are at Food Safety Summit.
We are.
We're so excited to be here this year and to learn and to really see people that we haven't seen in a year or so. So it's been great catching up. So if you are here and you're listening to Real Talk, put in the comments, "Hi, I'm here. Let's meet," because we'll be sure to find you.
Absolutely. That's why we're here.
Hmm.
Because
Yeah.
if you've been following us, you know that we are all about people,
Absolutely.
and not just like emailing them and all of that, but like how do we have these moments where we're intentionally creating space
Yeah.
to spend time with people?
Yes.
That's what we're doing this week.
We are. That's what we're
In
doing
another way.
over really the last couple of weeks, right? Because today we're really talking about, some of the learnings that we got when we
Yes.
attend a conference last week in Portland, which we loved. That was such an amazing conference. Jill actually spoke at that conference. So, hi, Damaris. How are you? Oh, from PR. Yes.
I know. We're gonna have to do a show live from there someday.
Oh, no.
Puerto Rico, here we come.
Yes. Yes, we do miss you here. But hopefully we'll see you soon.
But yeah, like so Tia was saying, we had the honor to be at this Farm to Label conference last week that was sponsored by really a law firm, and where they bring in their food clients. It's their food and beverage division, and they bring them in and really share different information, resources, connections, and create once again places for people to learn, share, connect.
Yes, and we love connecting with them because they really take this holistic approach. And so we really wanted to share some learnings that we kind of picked up that we love to share with our audience, because it's one great thing. And the reason why we did Real Talk is that we want to talk about the things that people are talking about right now, give our perspective, but also hear from you. So please say hello in the comments, and please add your comments, your perspective, as well as your questions, because we love having this talk each week.
We do. So yeah, I think as you said, one of the big takeaways last week was, we're getting more familiar with this law firm. And they're fantastic. DWT, look them up or reach out to us. We'll certainly connect you.
Yes.
But what we love is this holistic legal support system that they create around a food company.
Yes. And it was very interesting because I've never talked to a group like this where they really have different lawyers supporting each aspect of a business, including food safety. So they have people really focused on, co-manufacturers and that relationship, or acquisitions and that relationship, franchises, right? Labeling, of course, litigation, which we'll talk a little bit about that a little later. Labeling, right? Like labeling later. No. But it's so interesting because they really do, instead of this one person that's trying to do every aspect of law, they really have people that are specialized in the different areas. And being in food safety and quality, specifically food safety, and when we have conversations with legal, right, like we need to talk to someone that understands the law from that perspective, whether or not we're working with a contract with co-packers, or we're looking to sell, or labeling, or any or even if you get to a point that you might have to do a recall or go into litigation, right? That's very real things that if a lawyer is involved, that stuff might be happening.
And the reason for me it really resonates is because early in my food safety quality leadership journey, right, they said, hey, here's our general counsel, ask them questions. And I was like, okay. They didn't know food law. And what I love about DWT is they said, I had to write it down, they are not just lawyers who are foodies, they are food lawyers.
Yeah.
And I think that just even goes to when we talk about food safety quality professionals, right? We're not just kind of in food safety, like we have expertise in these areas.
So that really resonates with us.
It does. And, it wasn't until then I was introduced to food lawyers that I was like, oh, they bring a whole different perspective. But it was very kind of narrow bandwidth. And so while they could answer some things just weren't under their
Right.
expertise or
Mhm.
not the place that they did, that they practiced.
Yeah.
And so finding a resource that could do all of these areas was fantastic.
Absolutely.
And to see that last week.
Absolutely. And, the reason why this resonated with us, like if you are new to Real Talk Food Safety, Tia, it's Jill, and we own Catalyst. And at Catalyst, we really focus on people and we focus on building leaders. And we're technical people, right? Like we've been in food safety and quality for years. And so that link to what we actually do in leadership is something that interests us. So if you're new, you hear a lot of talk about that because that's exactly what interests us in this field and why it's so important as we talk about leadership in technical fields, as we talk about food safety culture. It's so important that people who have that technical background are the ones that's stepping up in leadership to help drive culture changes, to help really drive culture and continuous improvement. Like we have to be the people that's going to step up and do it.
Yes.
Like just like with this law firm, right? Like they know like the people that are going to be, that should be responsible for law are not the people that are, sort of interested in it, right? But it's the one who actually know food law. That can actually help you if you're in a situation, but they also do a lot of preventative work.
Yes.
Which we love, obviously.
Right. And I think that's part of the difference between, we talk about the real versus regulatory HACCP, right?
Yeah.
So, I'm going to translate that into what does the law, the regulation say verbatim versus what is the intent?
Yes.
And right, sometimes that distinction is what people in our organizations will ask us as the people who are responsible for for regulatory, like what's that supposed to be? What do we do?
Yes.
Sometimes people are like, yep, we get it. We're going to go with that intent. Sometimes they're not. So sometimes having a food lawyer, someone who really, this is what they do, that's an important part. So you can understand the risks if you do this option A or option B.
Yes, absolutely. And one thing that was mentioned during the conference is that like they really understand where their role starts and ends as a lawyer, right? And in food safety, that's also what we want, right? Like we are partners with our lawyers. Many times I've reported into the legal organization as food safety because of the risk that we manage, right? But when does one expertise start and end, and when does the other one pick up? And so being able to know like, okay, this is where I am responsible for, and this is where you start, is very important. But the group that was there really understood that. And they understand. It's funny, we're connected to them because, they'll reach out for food safety expertise, but that's because they understand, right? Like as a lawyer, this is where I play, but we need those food safety expertise because that's where you play.
Yes. And so, I always encourage if you don't have a food lawyer in your network, find one.
Yes.
Because I think what else happens is we can feel the pressure. And so people will pull us into, well, you should just do some of that regulatory and make those decisions on our behalf. Sometimes it depends on your comfort level. And it depends on perhaps your experience. But having someone to fill that space and be there perhaps even as a validation, as a confirmation, as a second set of eyes. If somebody's already asking you for that, that means they don't have it.
Right. Yeah.
And so you'll need to find that support somewhere. And so
that is really important. I've had that support, even an external partner, right, in my organization where, we have legal counsel, but really that legal person is, doesn't really understand
they're
food
doing
law.
general.
Right. They're doing
just
general
business stuff.
Exactly. But I have someone else that's looking at, what type of lawsuits are happening around labeling, what's happening in the space here. And so really being able to provide that legal counsel, right, to me, right, as a food safety leader, so that as I'm making decisions internally, we're managing that risk.
Yes. Damaris, we couldn't agree more that relationship with legal and food safety is so important. Between compliance and consistency and even to leverage them to help with leadership, right? It's another voice to be able to help influence the risks around whatever you're doing. And put them into some type of context.
Absolutely. I mean, there's many times that I'm trying to communicate a risk, right? And I need to loop in my legal people so that they can also communicate that risk, right, to the organization. And so that's being able to use your circle of influence really in those relationships that you build to help steer the organization down the right path. So that is extremely important. That relationship should definitely be there. And then, one thing too that kind of makes me think about this relationship on like the law, complying with the law, and then complying with regulations. The way that regulations are written, and maybe some people argue even the law, but in some ways where regulation is written, it's really like this overarching thing, right? Like you must manage hazards, right? Like, and then it's like, whoa, what hazards?
What is the intent?
Exactly.
Versus what's written, right? There's so many interpretations of what that can be.
It is. So when you're thinking about it for your organization from a food safety standpoint, right? Like you're trying to fit within the regulations, which you probably know a little bit more than your lawyer, depending on what type of lawyer it is. So you're trying to fit the risk of the organization and what's happening in regulations and how your organization want to move forward. Your legal representation would also be a part of what type of risk does this organization want to take on, right? So you can have those conversations and should be having those conversations on, this is the path that I'm thinking about going down. This is what type of risk exists. This is the risk that we're mitigating or eliminating. How do you feel about that? Have you heard of, this is like the number one question I always ask my legal people. Have you heard of anything happening in the industry where any legal action happening in the industry around the X, right? Around what we're talking about, because they will have that perspective and be able to communicate even with their peers on like, hey, have you heard of anything happening in this space? And so that's really nice to have that person to, again, help influence the organization around risk.
Well, and it also adds to, we're all about leadership development. But once again, as you develop through your career, typically you're in these situations where you're going to be asked to step into some of the risk evaluation analysis at a higher level. But even before then, as you start thinking about how do I integrate as a business leader, these are developing the skills to know and nurture your network and have those resources so that you can have better conversations, have more impact. And really it's part of like for your well-being as well. I can certainly share some things where like our team has carried the load and the weight, right, of these regulatory requirements, and we believe we're doing the right thing. And then perhaps somebody's challenging it or they're saying that's not right. And how do you as a leader then stay steadfast in understanding what that is or be curious?
Yes, absolutely. That's a great point and a great point to get other people in the boat with you.
Yes.
Right. So like you all feel great about doing the right thing. We think you're on the right path, right? What does your legal team think? And how can they be that support? Because if anything goes a little off path, right, your legal team would be there to be like, nope, we did the right thing. And we support that.
Yep.
So that's a really good point.
Integrate. Right?
Yes.
We're business partners. We're not just food safety people.
Yes. Can we repeat that again? Right? Because that's what we strive for at Catalyst, is for us to be true business partners. So when you talk about that relationship with legal, like if you're not talking to your legal team, right, you need to start having those conversations. And maybe you feel like you're not the right person to have those conversations. Maybe you're not the decision maker. Yeah, maybe you're not the decision maker, but set up some time and ask some questions like, hey, how do you integrate within the organization? What are some things that you come across? How can I help being a part of the food safety team with your role? How can we help each other? And you might not be the person that they call on, but you having that knowledge, right? Then we always talk about that circle of influence, right? Now you know a little bit more information that will help you be a better leader.
Yes.
Right.
And even if you're not at the point where it's with perhaps your lawyer or your attorney or at that top leadership influencing, but just think about how even with regulatory in our day-to-day work, how the alignment on our expectations and how we make decisions about perhaps an event or product disposition, all of those things come from alignment as a leader to really navigate through and say, when this happens, what are the options we have? I'll use labeling as an example. Like as an organization, what are the risks with relabeling, with putting a sticker on, with doing
Yes.
this? Like, which ones can we do? Do we want to do?
Yeah.
Don't we want to do?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
knowing those in advance so that when the situation comes up, because if you've been in food for a hot moment, you know it will. But what are we actually going to do with that product?
Yeah. You might be thinking about, well, I don't really know where to start. One interesting way that I did it, I actually led an employee resource group. And one way for me to find out information, just like who is all involved in the process of a recall, I actually used a recent recall for the organization that I was in. I was not involved at all, right? It wasn't a part of my business unit. It wasn't a part of my facility, but I actually used a recall that we had, and I reached out to different people, and I actually had each person. I had a person from sales, I had a person from marketing, had a person from legal, had a person from operations. I literally had people from different functions talking about their role in a recall. And that just was obviously informative for the group, right? But even for me to connect with the different people and to understand, right? Like that just, again, opens that circle of influence. Now I know someone in sales, someone in marketing, someone in legal, right? And that was just stepping outside of that box and saying, how do I use the tools that I have? How do I use the groups that I'm a part of? The different committees, right, that you might sit on at work. How do you use those areas to learn and grow and connect and build your network, right? That's one way. I thought that was actually really hard to put together because there were so many people, but people loved it. People loved it.
It extends beyond the, like, who's on your recall team.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Because we kind of outline all those, but then, and you could do so many mock recalls, but the actual event and the postmortem to review.
Yeah.
So once again, it's kind of that holistic approach, which last week, that's what really stood out to us. This holistic approach when you bring in these types of lawyers, food lawyers, but even DWT. We're going to shout out for you. Because having all of those different areas of practice, I guess, is probably the best way to approach it.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
Or to define it.
So we love that about it.
Yes.
The second thing that we loved about it is that Jill actually sat on a panel at the conference, and it was such an amazing panel, and it was all based on risk.
It was about what happens for something that's an event to turn it into a crisis. And it was really interesting because we, of course, did a prep call beforehand, just with the other panel members and, the group. And one of the things that actually came up, which totally kind of, I don't want to say blindsided me, but I had never considered this perspective, was that someone had said, top leadership feels like middle managers are resistant for change and to make a difference when it comes to moving food safety. And that was like, I was like, what?
I want to, like, if you're listening, whether you're listening live or listening on replay, like put an emoji in the comments on how does that make you feel to hear that a top leader would think that middle managers are the ones that are not open to change.
Yeah. But at first I was a little bit, honestly, I was a little pissed off. I was like, how could you even think that? Like, have you been living on Mars?
Right.
But then I stopped and I was like, okay, how have we contributed to this? What is our role? Because if that's the perception out there, once again, even we use this, it starts with us.
Yes.
What is the message that they're getting or seeing, or the story they're creating that is creating this gap from what we're asking for and looking for support versus what they're seeing that we're willing to do?
Absolutely. And I feel like that's exactly what our technical leadership program does. Like, it really is created in a way that I, as a leader, right? How can I make sure that I'm taking steps forward? Yes. And sometimes we do get stuck in the mud, right? Like, we get stuck in the mud and we're like, man, we don't have the right resources. Top leadership is not listening to us. I'm screaming at the top of my lungs, right? And no one is moving. And to hear this perspective of like, well, we're not moving because you're not moving. We're not moving, right?
It's a standoff.
It's a standoff. It's a standoff. We really take the approach, and why we want, wholeheartedly believe that coaching is key to true leadership development and to true leaders, because it really takes out all those external factors and really have you focus on you.
Because in my prior life, had I heard a comment like that, I would have been like, I would have had a few probably not so nice words to say about how I thought this perspective was. And I would have just kept going.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have had the moment to create the pause to go, wow, what are we doing? What am I doing?
Yeah.
What is the miss in that story? Because that's really where we need to focus on what we're doing and how people are interpreting that.
Yes.
And I need to change the conversations, right? Our QA magazine article. Like, I need to have different conversations if I need to change that story that this person is holding.
Yes.
You know, the one thing, and we didn't have a chance to dive into it more, but the one thing I did think about that could perhaps explain that perspective is, right, so often top management just says, here are the goals for the year. And we're like, what?
Right.
How are we supposed to do all that? And I can definitely see where that would be interpreted as like we're resistant.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
But really what it is, you know, more of a, we need support. We need some help with clarity, alignment, expectations.
Right, yeah.
Than it is resistance.
Absolutely.
But it's being interpreted perhaps as resistance. So how do we do that different?
Exactly. It's looking through like what do we need, right? Like what do we need to be better leaders, right? How do we have those conversations around expectations and priorities? You know, how do we even have that conversation to say, I see these goals being rolled out and there's really no connection between the top priorities of my facility or my area and what I have listed here. Can you help me connect?
Yes.
And then how in the future can I be a part of setting those goals so that it is representative of what I see in my region, in my area, in my plants. And so that's taking an approach of like, oh my God, they always do this, right? It's always a list of things that doesn't really matter, to, okay, how do I learn more about it? And then how am I a part of that solution, right? Like, how can I help? How can I be a part of that?
Yeah, because, right, we want to be a business partner. So when they come to us, we're like, if that's where the business needs or wants to go, like, we're excited. But then also stepping into what we need. Like, I am happy to be part of that. To do that, I will need this.
Yes.
And really being straightforward on what that looks like. Or we do this.
Right. Yes.
Providing some options because, like we said, we can't carry the load alone, but we also have to tell people what we actually need, not assume they know what we need, not just say, I need more money and I need more people. Like, what are the specific things that will move us to be able to do that?
Yes, absolutely. This is really talking. I mean, it triggers me back to the last real talk that we had, which I think it was the last one around permission and authority.
Yes.
Like where it's like, you have to step into the permission, you have to step into the authority, you have to step into your power as a leader and have those conversations. Yes. And you might get to a point where it's like, you know, maybe, oh no, you can't be a part of this goal setting. You can't be a part of this. You can't be a part of that. Like, then start in your influence circle, right? Like, and then continue to grow that, continue to influence. Because, you know, I keep going back to what Jill said, like, top leadership isn't just going to get it one day. No. Like, it's not going to happen. They're not going to get it. And so it's like, how can you start to move that dial a little bit in your area? And from experience, right, I know things will start to ripple.
They will. And I think the part that this relates to with the panel is when we talk about an event versus a crisis, an event part of how we keep it from being a crisis is for us to step into that space.
Yeah.
And to be asking questions, to be curious, to be saying, this is what I need.
Yes. Yes.
Because if we haven't been able to clarify expectations, alignment, our authority, when we have permission, those are the things that then we kind of get stuck in the mud.
Yes.
And because we're not able, ready, or aware of information to make the decision, those are sometimes the gaps between what's an event versus what's a crisis.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, the panel also talked a little bit around like, is it a crisis for me or is it a crisis for you? Is it a crisis for everyone? And I think that goes to exactly what you're saying. If there's expectations, if there's clear expectation, clear priorities, clear process, right? Clear leadership, then a crisis means the same thing for the group, right? It means the same thing for the organization. And we also understand that if I'm in my own local crisis because I'm like, oh no, I didn't expect this today, right? I am still aligned with, is this a crisis for the organization? And then now I know, okay, it's not a crisis for the organization. So I don't need to call the CEO and tell them that, this is happening, right? I might just need to talk with my team and say, hey, this is happening. Let's work on it. So just being able to say, and I know a lot of people ask the questions, but when do I get my manager involved? Well, that's really aligning on, well, what does it mean to have a crisis? What does it mean that things are starting to bubble up, that you do need to involve your manager?
And, I think in the past, a lot of that has been something that organically we figure that out as we go. But how nice it is to be in a role where here are the things.
Mm-hmm.
Here are the times where it's an emergency, where you call me in the middle of the night. Here are the things where, you know what, just give me a recap on that tomorrow.
Yeah.
Or shoot me an email so that way I can, get the information. Mm-hmm. But that, as a leader, that's our responsibility to be able to provide that to our team members.
Yes.
If we keep them guessing, those are the things that I always say. At 2 a.m, we don't need our people out on the floor trying to figure out this space where we've created gaps for them.
Yes.
Our role is setting them up for success.
Absolutely. And if you have not done that as a leader, take the time to do it. Mm-hmm. And maybe you're new to a leadership role, or you're new to your group, and you do need some time to kind of figure out, okay, what are those emergencies, right, that I need to be contacted on? But start making that list and sharing it, and know that it moves, right? It's a living document. You don't have to wait till everything's on there. But start communicating those things, because that's when you and your team are really going to, be in alignment. Because I've heard, oh, we'll just figure it out organically. That leads to broken trust.
Pain. That's the overwhelm.
Right. That's the overwhelm.
Because there's so much uncertainty. There's so many unanswered questions. There's so little, or honestly, some of it was we were afraid to document what to do.
Because, right?
Yes. There's those type of things, which sounds funny, but it's, well, we don't want to back ourselves into a corner in this situation, because if it happens again and it's a little different, okay, we have to think about how we support people.
Right.
And once again, we can always update, edit documents to support what we've learned along the way.
Exactly.
It's not meant to handcuff us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And knowing who's your team, right? Mm-hmm. There's times where it's okay to say, let me get back to you.
Yes.
Right. I worked at an organization where we had a few quality engineers, and at this one particular site, we had to move. We used to say, we're a team that's in lockstep. We had to move together. Absolutely. Because if somebody said something to one operation team, then the other operation team is going to be like, Tia, why are you saying something different? Yeah. So it was, even as new quality engineers came in, I always made it a point to say, if you can make decisions, just know that when you make a decision, you're making it for the full plant, not just your area. And so that puts things in perspective on if I don't know what's happening on that side of the plant, I need to say, let me get back to you. And then pull my team together and say, hey, I came up with this question. This is what I'm thinking. Does that make sense for your area? And a lot of times, yes, we need that. Go ahead and roll it out. Or sometimes it's oh, we didn't do that because of this. So it know your team, right? And get to know your team and work within your team. And it's okay. I don't know. Let me get back to you.
And those are the things that are the difference between an event and a crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes it's something that's been made just internally.
Yes.
So
yes.
I think with the panel, what was interesting is, of course, I was on there, and of course I'm advocating for leadership and preparing people and setting them up for success. Mm-hmm. And some of the other parts that came up too that were great as well is having other experts in your network.
Yes.
So for example, when you have a crisis, do you have a food lawyer
mm-hmm.
on call?
Yes.
Do you have a toxicologist on call?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have someone who, for example, if you need something relabeled, but you don't have internal capacity, who's that person? Who's the company that you're reaching out to?
Mm-hmm.
We've done some really great technical talks on here with different people or different organizations and companies. Are any of those on your list to be if I have a problem with sanitation, here's who I call.
Mm-hmm.
If I have a problem with for material, here's who I call.
Right, exactly. Mm-hmm. And start that now.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things when COVID hit, right? We were putting together a plan. I had 2 emergency service people on my list, my primary and my backup.
Mm-hmm.
And I called them and I made sure, okay, you can respond in this amount of time. This is how much money it will be. I had all the details so that when, he was really like, my primary was on speed dial, right? Like I just had to send an email with this detail and they were like, yep, we will be there within whatever amount of time it is.
Yeah.
But what's important is that we had that conversation before we even had an incident, right? Before we even had a scare, right? Like we already had that information. And so that determines if that's going to be an event or is that going to be a crisis?
Yeah. And I mean, even things like we had one slaughter facility where we had great relationships with our inspectors. They allowed us to do things like, and we had a good trust where we could be like, off the record, what if something like this was happening? Or, hey, we heard somewhere else, like a friend maybe asked this question, which I know it sounds like it's getting around, but those are the things in your network that help things either be an event or a crisis, because it's giving us an idea. And you can even make it more formalized. Like, who is your local, how good is your relationship with your local inspector? Do you know people at FDA that are on some of the different, like, the recall teams that if you need to reach out, or somebody who's affiliated there, or sometimes we rely on our lawyers to do some of that as well. But once again, they're not always the food experts, but who is in that space to help you understand what you're facing.
Absolutely. That's so important. And do it now. Do it now so that it is an event and not a crisis.
Yes.
One other thing that was brought up on the panel, which Jill did such a great job at, is, I know, she's like, what are you about to say? Is incorporating people, right? And we talked a little bit about it before, but your people and the ability to lead is a part of your risk factor. And it really is. And so Jill really brought this perspective, obviously, because that's what we do every day, right? But she brought this perspective on, it's not just about the process and this and that. It's really around if there isn't a crisis or if there is an event, right? Your leadership is going to be able to tell you how well you're going to get through it, and not top leadership, right? We're talking about the people middle managers, the people that are involved doing the work, right? If you have some leadership capacity, right, where it's like, I really don't I don't feel like I have the authority. I feel like, I don't really know what's going on from a leadership standpoint. I haven't been able to lead in this way. Maybe they don't directly report into me, so I haven't really talked about leadership. That event is going to turn into a crisis quick.
It will.
If you have people that are prepared and ready, just like we talk about with your contacts, if you have people that are prepared and ready to lead, that have been leading, right, in your organization because they have those skills. There's so many, I'm just thinking back, like there's so many events that could have been a crisis but weren't because of the leadership.
Well, and that's part of like the like bench strength and the depth of your leadership, because too often we see someone gets promoted before they get to have some of these experiences or have the leadership development that will help them be successful.
Right.
But we all know that that's actually supposed to happen before we get promoted. As we're thinking about that next role that we want, how are we really helping people develop the skills today for what they want to do tomorrow?
Yes.
It's not just like, if we're like, wow, you really need to know HACCP today to you. Like, we've lost.
Right. Exactly.
Like, you're supposed to have your HACCP plan ready. You're not supposed to be trying to figure it out.
Yes.
Same thing with being a leader. Like, if I'm moving into this next role, a different role, a lateral, whatever it is, like, start building those things today. And, I think along with that, a lot of times we talked about the difference between an event and a crisis was listening to people on the floor.
Absolutely.
In spaces, because they have probably been like raising the flag going over here.
Exactly. There's smoke. A problem.
I see smoke. Smoke. Right. And people are like, oh, it's probably, I don't know, fog.
It's a barbecue
fog.
Happening.
Right. It's a campfire. And you're like, no. I think it's something different. But instead, like, if we listen to people and figure out, okay, is that a campfire? Is it a barbecue? Like, who knows? Let's go make sure we all understand that's not something that's the sparks are flying and are going to get out of hand.
Exactly. I think that goes with Janello's point around, like, it's not accurate to generalize that middle managers are resistant, but actually there's resistance that can happen at all levels. But you know what? If someone's resisting, right? If you feel like someone's resisting, that's them raising a hand and saying there's smoke.
There's questions, there's support.
Absolutely. And a lot of times we find that they just weren't involved in the process, or it doesn't address the smoke that they see, right? So it might even be that we know that smoke is happening, but we have an actual fire over here that we need. Like that might be it. And that person could be like, okay, I'll manage my smoke over here. You go and manage that. Just know that I'm here and this will become a fire, right? It might just be that conversation.
Could be.
But if you are getting resistance from anybody, from operations, right? Even as a food safety team, right? Like if you're getting pushback on something, ask, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Why the pushback?
Acknowledged.
Right?
Yes. I sense resistance and totally. Actually, I just want to understand what's behind that.
Yeah.
So
that's really important. And that's something that I feel like you brought to the panel. Because otherwise I feel like it would have just stayed within like these common, risk factors that you see. But if you are not looking at your people, if people are not a part, and specifically their development, right? Their leadership development is, if that is not a part of your risk assessments, right? Or your risk factors out there, and you're not having those conversations and you're only looking at a number on a piece of paper, you're missing something.
And actually that's part of what we do in Strategic Leader. Like how do you more holistically look at that for developing yourself, your team, those parts. And it's a little different, of course, than some of the standard HR.
Which if you don't know Strategic, it is after our boot camp. So we have a new boot camp opening on May 25th. After boot camp, our next level is Strategic. So you'll hear more about that.
Yes. And we love that you're here with us. And so if you're here with us, I'll just ask, like, have you signed up for boot camp yet?
Oh, yes.
Or somebody on your team. Like, and if you're like, oh, I'm not sure, try it out.
Try it out and see, and
life-changing. And that's,
it really is. It really is. I mean, the feedback that we've gotten from the last boot camp that closed a couple of weeks ago, when we talk about, the risk of leadership, right? Like, those people probably were doing a great job in their roles, right? Now they're even stronger leaders to manage things that are coming their way, right? And for some people, it was like, oh, I've never thought about it that way. Or even to think about like, how do I get people at the plants to buy into what I'm doing? And then, to have conversations around like, they really are your team. Even though they're not directly to you, they really are your team. So how do you help influence them that way?
Energy goes where our focus is. So if we're not focused on our team, then our energy won't go there.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So the last thing I loved about last week was the vibrant energy that small businesses bring.
Oh, yes.
So DWT does a lot of work with startups, and they actually even had like a little showcase of the folks that have probably only been in business maybe a couple of years, if that. They're still making things maybe in a commercial kitchen, maybe a co-man kind of starting in that space. But
it's fantastic.
The passion that they bring for their products and like the new products that people are creating, like amazing.
Absolutely. And so tasty, tasty. But we love meeting, entrepreneurs and people in the food space because they want to learn about food safety. They want to start food safety. A lot of times they don't know where to start, right? Or how to start, or they're super overwhelmed because, we're looking at a regulation and that can be overwhelming. But then like, we have a list of things. We have a list that we share to entrepreneurs too, like a list of like, I don't know, 100 things, maybe 25 things. I don't know. But it's like, but think about it, seems big to them, right? It looks like a long list. And we know all of those things are needed, right? Like you need your preventative maintenance, you need your labeling, you need your packaging, you need all of these things in order for you to be able to manage risk, right? And food safety. But as you're starting out, a lot of the conversations that we have is how do you build that? That doesn't happen overnight.
No.
And so having the conversations with entrepreneurs and really being able to get their minds wrapped around, okay, I just need to start at my highest risk and then start chipping away at it. And what we see is like, oh yeah, I need to do that. And we talk about it all the time, like food safety enables their growth.
Yes.
And they know it, they see it.
Yeah. And if you start early, right. I think some of the more established organizations that many of us have encountered, worked with, have as suppliers, because food safety wasn't part of like the core, like the inner circle when they started, it was an add-on.
Yes.
And because of that, it's lived in this add-on place where now that's why, as we've talked about, why we haven't had the impact, why we're talking about food safety culture. Like nobody has that conversation about finance, do they?
Right.
No, they are part of the inner circle.
Yes,
and so the more we can encourage small businesses and entrepreneurs to really have some better food safety support up front. And it's not just cottage law, right? Most of them have moved out of cottage law, which is I make in my own kitchen. And what's next? And actually what I loved was Hot Mama Salsa.
Oh yes.
So
call out.
There, yes. Oh my gosh, this woman, we were asking her, like, she had this delicious salsa product. And we were asking her, like, well, where do you make it? And she, was sharing a little bit. And we're like, well, do you do food safety or do they? And she's like, oh, I just went through an audit. And she was like, it was painful. And I'm like, we make food safety fun. Like,
in her face,
she just went,
her face was like, fun. She's like, I need to talk to you a little bit more, because if you're saying food safety is fun, which food safety can be fun, and food safety is an asset to your organization.
Yes, but just think how that has influenced her perspective on food safety. So when she is growing her organization, if that is where she's starting with her perspective about food safety, how do we help improve that? So that way, when she is $100 million company or selling here, whatever it is that her dream is, that food safety has always been one of those things, that dreading it, like bringing it along, because she knows how important it is and that it enables growth.
Yes. Yeah. There were so many great businesses that were just like tasty, but like their whole mindset around food safety, like they want to do it, right? Like, and, we're always looking at spaces on how do we help entrepreneurs and how do we help them grow their business, and through food safety, right? And helping them prep for their next role,
next market that they want to be in.
Absolutely. If you are listening and you are one of the entrepreneurs we've worked with, the first few questions we ask you is just all around your business. Like, what are you doing now? Where do you want to go? Because we are business partners. We're your business partners, and our job is to enable that growth. Yes. I always say, even to businesses that I worked with, that like, you can do whatever you want to do. Like, be innovative, change the world through food. Like, I want you to do that. I just need to be a part of that conversation so that I can enable you to do it.
Yes.
And so like this conference was a big conversation around that. And that's just something that we really enjoy having.
Yes. So that was really fun to have that energy and to be in that space. And it was, even though it was a conference, it was still kind of a small, intimate group and just really spending, the day together. So
yes. There were, also really other great highlights. The co-founder actually of Silicon Valley Bank was there and did the opening, which was very interesting.
Yes.
Which obviously we know all about, Silicon Valley Bank. But even in it was all about risk. Again, he was talking about risk, but even in his conversation or his speech.
Hold on while I grab it.
Yes. Even in his speech he brought up leadership.
Sorry, I need more information.
Yes. He brought up leadership and how like this crisis, which, by definition, he was going through a crisis. How leadership, the fact that people knew how to lead, the fact that he knew how to lead.
Well, he stepped into
it. Right. He talked about how like he didn't even really have the authority anymore. But he knew he needed to protect his people. Yes. So he talked about how people are telling him, don't do it. And he's like, I need to step into leadership.
Because somebody needs to it started with him. He was looking around and everybody was wondering who was going to step up and help guide the ship. And he's like, why not me? Nobody else is, but somebody needs to. So it starts with me.
Absolutely.
That was Rob McMillan from Silicon Valley Bank, the wine division.
Yes. And then, that was an awesome story.
It was. And then the other one was Steven Satterfield.
Yes.
From Whetstone Media.
Yes.
Amazing. He tells, I've been reading in the publication that he has, and he does a lot of stories and their relationships to food. And the stories are around like the traditions and the culture and the history of different regions. And so you learn this history of where they've been, but then it's weaved in with food.
Yes.
And how it shows up today in different representations.
Yes.
So it's amazing. So check him out. He also did
High on the Hog on Netflix. Yes. So if you have Netflix, check that out, because it's such an amazing story. Honestly, he's all about stories, and I love hearing perspectives like his, where they have this passion around
Yeah.
food, you know, and making sure that we as food safety professionals can help enable them to continue to tell these stories, continue to nourish, you know, the world, and to share, you know, cultures. You know, he's all about like sharing different cultures.
Yes.
You know, continuing to fellowship and enjoy and laugh and talk and eat and drink, right? Like we want to be able to do that while not having to worry about, you know, 128,000 hospitalizations and 3,000 deaths. Like we want to be able to sip and drink and you know, talk with people without having that in the back of our mind. So as food safety professionals, you know, I know I feel like it really is my duty to help the world be able to do all of those passionate things in food.
Yeah. And that's, I think, why part of so many people are drawn to the food industry is because when we think about the two things that people have to have, like we need to breathe and we need food.
Mm-hmm.
Those are two things. And so when we can share, relate, and reach a deeper relationship because of something that we learn about each other through food,
Yes,
it's really powerful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's why we invite people over for dinner.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we, you know, like we communicate through food, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we connect through food. And so being a part of that, like I love being a part of that. And then like, you know, Jonello, that's a great point, right? Like prioritizing food safety will help them, you know, comply with regulation, being able to get in the stores they want to do, reduce their risk. And then also, you know, one of the things that we talked about even at this conference, obviously is full of lawyers, right, is around liabilities, right, and litigation. You know, a lot of them did litigation work for companies. And so it's, you know, that's a tough spot to be in. But because they look at it from a preventative side, they're thinking like, how do we make sure we'll be here if you end up there, right? People sue all the time, right? But how do we help you prepare for that? How do we try to prevent you from seeing a courtroom? And so that's just super important in prioritizing food safety. They know prioritizing food safety is the first step of it.
So if you're looking for who that is, we keep saying DWT. It's Davis Wright Tremaine.
Yes.
And they have offices all over, but the one in Portland is the one that is their hub for food and beverage.
Mm-hmm. So, yes.
So check them out, or if you reach out to us, we're happy to connect you with the right folks there.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it was an exciting. It was really fun last week to kind of be in these new spaces and kind of be re-energized and see some new perspectives. And once again, learning all around.
Absolutely. You know, so as you think about, right, like your risk and, you know, how you relate to legal and what you're doing at your organization, you know, we really just ask you to think about how are people a part of your process? How are you making sure that your people are not a risk to your organization? And we talked about them not being able to step up during an event or during a crisis, but also what happens if they leave, right? Like what happens if they leave the organization? Like that's also risk for your organization. So we would love for you to just like, as a takeaway, like spend some time just thinking about like, am I prepared? Am I truly prepared for leadership? You know, if I needed to step up in a different way, or even in your role now, are you prepared? And are your people prepared?
Yes.
Right. And the first, you know, a great first step is our boot camp.
Yeah.
It really is.
Plug it.
Yeah, because it really is. And we created it because we knew that was a gap. We know that's a gap in the technical field, specifically in food, because we know that there's leadership development out there. Absolutely. The principles are the same, right? But this relatability, being able to really talk about how our roles interact with leadership and how we can build our own influence, right? And how do we build safe spaces, knowing what our job is? Because that's been one thing for me is like, you know, I sit through leadership development and it's all really operations focused, right? And it's like, yeah, the concepts are great, but like, how am I going to do this with my sanitation team?
Yeah.
You know, how am I going to do this as the recall coordinator? How am I going to use these aspects as an R&D manager? We make sure that is incorporated in the leadership development.
We do. And it's intense. I mean, we're going to be honest. I mean, it's intense from the standpoint that you get out of it what you put into it.
Yes.
So if you're like, I'm going to come and this is the energy that I have to give at this point, that's great because everybody takes something away. But there's also, for example, we've had, because we just finished one, what's awesome is as we start seeing the workbooks come in, because we have about a 64-page workbook, because we know one way, right? You have to practice.
Right. Absolutely.
You can go to however many things that you want and learn and sit in front of the presentation and be interactive in that. But if you're not practicing it, if you're not reflecting and understanding how it's connecting for you and how you're connecting with others, like that's the next level of work. So I love when we start seeing the workbooks come in where people are sharing how they've been practicing, what they're incorporating, what they have noticed over 14 weeks and what they're carrying forward and what else they need. That just always warms my heart to see that is the impact. So
yes. Yeah. We hear the impact, right? We see the impact and being able to get the workbooks back and see how people are practicing and how things are moving. It is definitely very rewarding.
It is.
And then
so
we have
it takes work. So
it does.
If you do want to become a better leader, people who you're like, they're ready to step up or we need to get them prepared. Like there's work involved with ours.
Absolutely.
So I just always want to be
yeah, that's true.
Straightforward. It's not just a checkbox.
Absolutely. But you all know that about us, being on Real Talk. Like we are actually moving the dial. We're not about like, let's just collect data. Let's just do this. Let's just check a box to go to training and say that we've done something. We're all about like, how do we make sure that you are moving the dial? And it does take work and it takes time. And we're here to support that through our leadership development, but we also have something called Catalyst Lab, which will allow you to continue to practice within our community.
Well, we've got the whole program, really, the whole journey. So I should post that.
Yeah,
we'll post that out on LinkedIn here quick, so that way, in the next day or two, so that you can see, because it's progressive.
Yes, it is.
We are not one-dimensional people. We are not one-dimensional food safety quality leaders. Like we progress, and we need to have something that supports our growth, maturity, and how dynamic we are in our roles.
Absolutely, and that's why we built it, right? That's why we built our program. That's why we built this path. So we're always excited to share it with you all. We're always excited to hear your feedback. And then we always love, this is like real life, like working through risk and working and stepping up into these leadership positions, even if we might not have the title, right? We might not have the team or whatever it happens to be. Like we have to step up as leaders if we're going to see a real change to our numbers and a real change to culture.
Yeah. And to go along with that, Damaris, like you said, I mean, like no real change will come and nothing happens by magic. It's being intentional.
It's being intentional.
We always talk about intentional leadership is what will move things forward.
Yes,
so,
absolutely.
But yeah, go out if you are, go out to our website. It is posted out there. You can register right from our website.
Absolutely.
Go under, I think it's programs and services. Check it out. Right. We probably don't talk about it enough, but I mean, we have boot camp. We have not out there, but like workshops that we do private events, we do private coaching. So there's a whole lot of different ways to help support you in the way that meets you where you are.
Absolutely. And I'll also put up our email because, you can always just email us and set up some time with us so we can talk about what you have going on and how we can help you and your organization.
Yes. So
thank you for being with us today and your comments and your perspectives. We definitely appreciate that. We love to be this voice for you all. So thank you, Jonella. We do love providing this space and we for us to talk.
Sorry, right? As I'm talking, I'm sorry. But we're so glad that you're here too. And you are part of the voice and helping make the change.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Which is what this space is, right? Like we created this space to talk with you all. So, we appreciate the comments. We appreciate your perspectives. We appreciate you to be on our show as well. So if you're out there and you're like, hey, I want to be a part of Real Talk, please do not hesitate to reach out to us because we're always looking for guests to share a different perspective.
You bet. Right?
All right. Well, we are going to get back to Food Safety Summit. I'm sure there's going to be more learnings to come from that we'll talk about on Real Talk.
And we'll share the updates and
we will
capture some scenes to be able to share with you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you are here, please say hello. Please say hello to us because we are excited about meeting you and hearing about what you have going on around food safety culture and leadership development.
Absolutely. All right. But until next week, I hope you have a great week and be intentional.
Yes, absolutely.
Be the catalyst.
We'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.